What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Chaotic Insights, where I break down the TV show Chaotic, and maybe the TV show isn't the only thing that's chaotic, but today we'll be talking about episode 32, Chasm Quest. So grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in. Episode summary: Tom is in the Betadrome as Blazer, exploring Prexor Chasm with a motorcycle. And he's been scouting out this location a lot lately, being prepared for when he actually decides to port there and explore for real. His friends convince him that it's time to actually port there and go there for real for a scan quest, get some good scans from your Prexor Chasm scan. And so he grabs his scanner and he ports there, and now he's in Prexor Chasm. And while he's there, he's like, let me get a new scan just in case. And then Tom encounters some of the dangers of Prexor Chasm, and eventually he gets captured by Smilden. And Smilden is interested in using Tom's scanner to escape his hard life in Prexor Chasm because he's getting too old to fight and there's a new danger terrorizing the chasm. Tom explains that the scanner will not work for him, and Smilden makes him leave. He threatens Tom until he ports back. Now, back at Chaotic, Peyton wins the opportunity to have the first match against Tom with his Prexor Chasm scan. And in the Betadrome, they battle, but as they're battling, they encounter this giant goo-like creature that is alive, but it's not a creature. They compare it to a disease, and it codes Peyton, and Tom vows to help all the creatures in Prexor Chasm however he can. And, he wants to help them face this new danger. So, analysis. First off, time has passed. Oh my goodness. We saw Tom win this Prexor Chasm scan. He won the card in his match against Codemaster Krellin. And you know what? This is the 7th episode since we saw him do that. There's been 6 episodes in between Tom getting his Prexor Chasm scan by defeating Codemaster Krellin, and now time has passed. And so I've been thinking about the orders of the episodes lately, and I haven't quite come to a conclusion yet, but we've been exploring Kaz and we've been exploring Peyton's perspectives lately, which certainly mix it up and I do think add a nice variety to the show. But the overarching story itself is Tom's. Tom's story is the one that we're following as an audience, which makes sense because, like, I described him as the self-insert character for the audience because, he's the fish out of water character when he first gets to Chaotic, and then, we learn as he learns, and then he, like, has this narrative arc where he becomes a great player and defeats Codemaster Krellin. Wonderful, beautiful, you know, and whatnot. But then they use Kaz and Peyton and you could argue Sarah-focused episodes to expand the world or tell cool stories, but they don't push this overarching narrative forward at all. They are more so exploratory episodes. I'm thinking Kaz when he climbs the ice mountain to help Rymusa battle Perithion. That didn't really move our narrative story forward, but we got to get a peek into a side of Param that we don't normally get a peek into. Or I'm thinking when Kaor comes to Kaz because he thinks Von Blue is going to overthrow him, and then Kaz, you know, battles a Von Blute player and then he goes back. That didn't really push our narrative story forward, but it gave us insight and information on the working of the underworld and how that political structure is set up and how there's like unrest. And so these Kaz focused episodes have expanded our world. And Peyton too, like the Stelgar episode, we got to learn about how Momark makes creatures, or even like Scavenger Scan, which is Peyton and Kaz. We got all of those creature cameos and just showed off this world. Whereas the Tom focus episodes usually push the story forward in some way, Like, those first 4 episodes are mostly just exposition as we see Tom learn about the world. And then there's like that mini 2 episode arc with Kaz and the Vile Driver. And then episodes 6 and 8, we get Tom battling with Maxor, establishing that he like loves his Maxor. 9 and 10, we have Castle Bodron or Bust when Tom loses his Maxor. And then 13 is his first interaction with Krellin. 15 is where he picks up Prejudice based off of the Castle Bodron episode. Or not picks it up, but he like, he picks up the Prejudice from Castle Bodron against Mopedians, and then he like starts to overcome that. And 16, 19, 20 is that arc where Tom is getting his Maxor card back, but Maxor has been affected by the music, and then he helps them, and then, he gets a good scan of Maxor. And then, push to 24, 25, Codemaster match against Krellin. He uses his newfound Maxor scan to help defeat Krellin, get this scan of Prexor Chasm. And so, like, that's how we've pieced together this overarching story of, he's new, he fights with Maxor, he loses Maxor, he gets him back, he wins. And that's where we're at. And it's filled with those like exploratory episodes. But push to now we're in episode 32. He explores the scan he got as a reward and vows to protect those creatures. That's basically all this episode is he explores and then he makes a vow. But it's been 6 episodes in between since we've gotten a Tom focused episode. And I was like, what's the longest break before? And that would be the 3 episodes before the Codemaster match, which having 3 episodes in between is fun, but now having 6 episodes in between, double that length, it makes it feel like forever. It's been like, wow, it's been so long since I've spent time with Tom as a character. And so it is kind of refreshing to see him again in some sense of the word, but now that space in between really emphasizes how much time has passed in between Tom getting the scan and Tom building up the confidence to go there for real. These 6 episodes in between have been important. A lot of them have been setting up information for what we'll need in season 2. And a lot of them are also standalone episodes at first glance. Like, they are standalone episodes, but they give us information of what we need later. So they do connect, but it's like, when you're watching them, it definitely feels like a break from this overarching story. But now that we get to revisit Tom and his storyline, that 6 episode break has that story justification that, Tom has been scouting Prexor Chasm for so long, and it really emphasizes how long. And so by the time he ports there for a scan quest for real, he's familiar with the location, and that familiarity leads to safety. Like, he's been prepping so that he can be safe in this dangerous location. And his friends say that he's been doing it a lot lately, which just adds more to how much time he's been spending in the Betadrome prepping for this task. And if this was the episode right after he got the card, like if we had Codemaster Krellin give Tom this card, and then the next episode, boom, we're in Prexor Chasm, it would feel like they're moving the story forward, but that immediacy would have robbed this storyline of some of its, like, gravity, I think, because giving this episode delayed gratification to the audience emphasizes that time and care that Tom has taken, but it also maybe adds to his fear and hesitation. Like, they do say some players never come back from Prexor Chasm, which I'm sure adds to that fear that Tom feels about his safety. And also that he's going alone. Like, Tom won this card, and he decides not to share it, which, okay, sure. But he's going alone to this dangerous location, and so of course there's some trepidation. Of course he's feeling like maybe he needs to prepare a lot because it's dangerous, and he's feeling fear, and that immediacy of if you put this episode right after the Codemaster match, it would have robbed that undercurrent of hesitation and fear. Because time passing, sure, it's like in a meta sense of, oh, time passes because there's 6 episodes in between, But also, like, time passes in universe, and the meta of the 6 episodes in between gives like a further justification to that. But it's that fear element that those 6 episodes, you start to wonder, oh, we haven't been with Tom for a while. Where has he been? And where he has been is in fear and hesitation, prepping for this moment. So, all that to say, we do get a nice Kaz moment in this episode too, where, Kaz is worried for his friend, and that shows like depth and a sensitive side to Kaz. And Sarah had a moment similar to this in an episode where she was like, I just hope he's okay. And Kaz has that moment of, I just hope he's okay. And so they round out this episode with that like depth moment for Kaz. But it is about Tom, and it's about him overcoming his fear and then encountering a new one. And I will say, this episode is not a full story. Like, Tom, sure, he overcomes his fear. That's like the inciting incident of the episode. You know what I mean? Tom working up the nerve to actually go to Prexor Chasm is like where the story starts. And so that's not like an arc in of itself. And this episode isn't a full story. It introduces us to Smilden, it introduces us to Prexor Chasm in a non-competitive setting, and it introduces us to this disease that infects Prexor Chasm. But besides that, nothing really happens. Tom explores, and then he explores some more, and then he and Peyton battle and explore. And so I'm not surprised that we don't really get an emotional arc from Tom. Like, I guess we do, like, him facing his fears, him being scared and hesitant to making this vow of him being so sure of himself and like he's determined he's going to help these creatures. But the conclusion of this episode is Tom making that vow. And so the disease itself, introduced, not dealt with. And that's like the actual inciting incident. The inciting incident of the episode is Tom saying, hey, I'm going to go to Prexor Chasm for real. The inciting incident of this story is that Prexor Chasm has a disease. And then Tom makes a vow, and then somewhere in the future, he's going to do something about it and like see if they can fix it or whatever. This episode is not a full story, it's just the beginning of it. And the end of the episode is just Tom accepting that call to action, which makes this story feel incomplete because it is. And it feels like just the beginning of the story because it is just the beginning. And so we wrapped up that Tom Codemaster storyline of Tom defeating his first Codemaster, being a newbie to being a good player, and now he's accepting this call to action into his next story. His next story is this Prexor Chasm whatnot. you know, the first story is over, and now we're on to a new adventure. And every end is a beginning, and every beginning is an end, and the end of the Codemaster match is the beginning to his next adventure. And that's where we're at. That's what we're exploring in this episode. That's like kind of a structural analysis of this episode. But then there's also the Smilden of it all, who he's tired of having a hard life and he just wants to escape when this new peril arrives. And so you really feel for him. And I think that is a really interesting concept for a chaotic creature. And it's something we haven't really seen yet. Someone who is like in poor, unfortunate circumstances and like needs means to get out. And especially since a lot of creatures we usually interact with are royalty or in the ruling class. Smilden being like a commoner, but also in a place that is not easy to get in or out of, and that is rough and ferocious. Having this character introduced also shows us a new side to Param. Of Param isn't all the glitz and glam, and there's conflict and there's politics and whatever, but also there are locations where it's just hard, you know, and Smilden is really the embodiment of that. And so introducing him in this way makes me look forward to what we see from him in the future. But I think Smilden being the reason why. Smilden is Tom's why he wants to help because he sees someone who needs help and is asking for it, and Tom answers that call to action. And so that's more of an in-story analysis of the way this is structured is, Tom goes there and then he finds a creature that needs help, and that's his justification for answering the call to action. Now, on to lore. We do learn things in this episode, believe it or not. Tom is solo in the Betadrome. Now, what does this mean? So, okay, this is actually really interesting to me because what is this about? So, being alone in the Betadrome? Come on. The Betadrome is for battling. And they say Tom has been scoping out this location a lot lately. And this episode starts with Tom alone in the Betadrome as Blazer. And, he leaves the Betadrome when he crashes and gets coated. And so this raises some questions for me because first, you can be alone in the Betadrome, and it's kind of counterintuitive in the way that they've previously established the Betadrome, because they've established it as it's the Betadrome, the Codemasters aren't watching, you can do whatever you want. And so me, I'm like, of course, why are you not scouting out locations? But it's also set up as a competition. It's this fantasy wrestling element, and so you kind of have to use the drome in a way for battle, because when Tom and Kaz went to the Betadrome and they were trying to pull memories from Interest or from Zalek about Interest, the people were upset. They were like, why aren't they battling? And that kind of gave us insight that the culture at Chaotic is that when you're in the drome, you're battling. And so having just one person in the drome, that's not a battle. That's just you being in the drome. You know what I mean? And so, what's that for? Like, why can you be there by yourself except for to explore? But when you're in there by yourself, is that still televised? Because, they use this kind of panopticon surveillance as a means of regulation. And so, if you're in a location exploring and then that goes into the database, are you not just like helping everybody out? Isn't it a good strategy to gatekeep what you know? Well, then also, how are you going to learn unless you go and explore by yourself? But if you're exploring by yourself, are you not showing that off to the world? Or at least to the people who are paying attention? So that's interesting. And I know that people should absolutely be using the Betadrome for these non-battle related activities, but I feel like there's still a premise of battle, and doing non-battle related activities in the Betadrome are subversive to this culture that they've established, especially in that episode where they're digging for memories about Interest. So that's the first thing. But now, second, logistics. If you're in the battle drum by yourself, how do you get out? Do you have to code yourself? That's kind of macabre. You know, can you just decide, hey, I'm done, like, let me turn back into a person? And if you're just exploring, and you feel content and you want to stop, do you have to attack yourself? Do you have to throw yourself off of some structure? Like, that feels like getting coded isn't the only way out of this situation. Like, it can't be. There has to be some off switch, but they haven't established that. So it's like, well, how do you? And if you have to code yourself, that feels wrong. It feels dark and macabre. Or like, how how would you let the simulation know that you're done and you just want to stop? There's not like a button you could press. The people want to know, and the people is me. And another thing, Peyton, Sarah, and Kaz say they saw what happened when Tom is alone in the drum. So they are broadcasting it, for the world to see. Is that interesting programming on the televisions at Chaotic? Or, do you have to go to the Betadrome Theater specifically to watch a singular person explore a location? I don't know. That's interesting. Is that what Peyton, Kaz, and Sarah are doing in their free time, just watching Tom explore? I don't know. So I guess all of this actually does make sense, but only in the Betadrome, where there's no rules and you can do whatever you want, except whatever you do will be broadcast on TV. Surveillance. Another thing we learn about the Betadrome in this episode is that they do reaffirm that you can use your opponent's battle gear in the Betadrome, which again is not revolutionary, but I do think it's always helpful to have a reminder that in the beta drum there are no rules, and so it leads you to question like, what else can you use your opponent's music? That would be fun, but maybe there are special settings you have to set up and play with. Maybe you could set up in the settings that you couldn't use your opponent's battle gear. But the big lore piece of this episode is, of course, the mystery that they introduce. And that mystery is, why is Chasm diseased? What is this goo squid creature with one eye that's coming to destroy the chasm? And it seems to be alive and it's attacking the chasm, but it's alive and it's a locational factor, like the bugs or the rats. And this one seems harmful though, and we know it's a locational factor because it gets picked up on the scan. But like the bugs or the rats, it's alive and it's in the drone. And so it makes you wonder, like, what is it? And of course, maybe they'll go on to answer that question in the future, but that's what they introduce. And so what happens, I guess we'll have to watch to find out and then, talk about it then. Now, on to fun facts and other notes. We see some familiar faces in the Prexor Chasm from Krellin's match, and I'm sure you can figure out who they are. Smilden and Proboscar and I don't know, whoever. And then we also see some physical cards in this episode, and the cards that Tom pulls out to represent each of his friends are Czar, the Underworlder, for Kaz, Scardalis, the Danian for Sarah, and Hune for Mopedians, which is Peyton. And so if you were curious who those cards were, that's who they are. And it makes you wonder, like, did they pull these specific cards because they think they represent each person? I don't think so. I think they just chose 3 cards that they want you to be aware of for marketing. And then the last note I wrote down, and actually this is a big one and this is important to me. What is Arius wearing? So when they're in the Betadrome, Tom plays as a creature and Peyton plays as a creature. And one of those creatures that one of them plays as is Arius, who is alphabetically one of the first chaotic creatures and one of the first drops. And here's the thing, what is he wearing? Because on his card, he wears a red tank and jean shorts. That's his fit. And you know what? It looks good enough. You know, it's definitely an outfit that he is wearing. But in the drome, he is wearing a black backless armor plate and dark washed jean shorts, which is not the same as what he looks like on his card. And so, like, if he got scanned when he was going through his emo era, if he was, trying, like, he's just trying around this armor plate, how does that stay up? There's no straps, it's backless. I don't want to know. But this is the first time that we see him in the series, and his outfit, like in the future, in season 2, after the animation change, he does get a more accurate outfit, and so it's just kind of jarring to see him make such a fashion statement in this episode, because what? What is that? And why does he look like that? And it bothers me. How does it stay up? I don't, whatever. Tape, maybe because it is an armor plate, it's structured in some way, but why? It could have been a black tank top. It could have been the red tank top that he actually is supposed to be wearing. But I just think that's interesting. And I think we see him one more time in this outfit, but it would have been like, even make the armor plate red. You know, why are they dark washed jeans? Why couldn't they have been light washed jeans? These are my questions, and I think the characters look the best when they reflect what they look like on their cards for the most part. And so just having this jarring difference, it makes you wonder, who made that decision? And do they know that the decision they made was wrong? So anyways, my final thoughts on this episode are, I like this episode. I have no major, well, I have no major qualms with this episode. It's slower paced and it's definitely not a full story, it's just an introduction, and so they stretch that exposition over a full episode, and it feels incomplete because it is. And the green goo monster is kind of freaky, and so I think that achieved that shock value that they were going for. And I look forward to returning to the storyline eventually after the animation change. But, it's to me it's a fine episode. I have no major qualms with it, and we get an introduction and it's fine. You're in chaotic and you enjoy being in chaotic, and isn't that the point? So with that, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you later. Bye.